This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit. What do you guys want to talk about?
The day is young, and here I sit on a Monday morning with droopy eyes looking at a computer monitor, thinking about all the wrestling I just watched over the weekend and how much sleep was lost as a result. Actually, to be fair, that's a lie. The only sleep I lost out on was the sleep from Sunday night, because at least WWE did me the common courtesy of shooting a live special overseas to where I could actually watch the thing mid-afternoon on tape delay. The AEW pay-per-view did me dirty, but I kind of went in expecting that, especially when I saw how mediocre that card looked on paper. Well, for today, we're going to shake things up a tad. We still have the Retro Raw report that we're going to do momentarily, but we also have two pay-per-view specials we need to cover, one from WWE and the other from AEW. I decided to do away with the SmackDown report this weekend for time's sake. Normally you would get those with the Monday shows here on the channel, but seeing as how these pay-per-view recaps are already going to be reasonably lengthy, I needed to cut something to make some room here. So the SmackDown report took the bullet this weekend. Sorry about that. You can all hear me rant and rave about that show next week. The one good thing about this weekend, despite that I'm sort of on autopilot mode right now, trying to stay awake, with it being Memorial Day weekend, the gym I normally go to is closed, so I did get to sleep in for an extra hour this morning. Not that it really did much of anything, but I'll take it. I mean, it's usually broad daylight by the time I get up in the morning anyway, with it being summer. It's crazy to think how things work out like that. 6 o'clock in the morning and it's already daylight. Makes it easier to wake up, but not with my sleep schedule. So with all that said, I'm going to sort of run down the gauntlet of all the content and proceed as such. I think I'm just going to go in order from how I watch the shows. We'll start with Retro Raw and try to get that done and over with as quickly as humanly possible. And a whole lot to say about that show looking back. I also just looked down to my left here. There's some dry cat barf directly to the bottom of my feet here. Oh, that's always pleasant to look at. Looks like it's been sitting there for a while. Anyhow, as the 1994 King of the Ring pay-per-view draws closer, our opening round brackets would be solidified by the end of this program. By the way, this is the May 30th, 1994 episode of Raw, for those keeping track at home. And in the tournament, we had one remaining slot to fill. A match that they initially announced for last week, being Tatanka versus the Gigolo Jimmy Del Rey, has now been abruptly changed to Tatanka versus Crush. And the rationale for this change of plans was because fuck it, why not, basically. Replacing Jimmy Del Rey with Crush. Yeah. Do you see why I never liked this guy growing up? How is it that every time something would have to get shifted around last minute, Crush was always the go-to substitution. Tatanka versus Jimmy Del Rey doesn't happen, replace him with Crush. Lex Luger versus Kurt Hennig can't happen, replace Hennig with Crush. And again, no offense to the guy. I have no personal vendetta against him, but fuck. It's Crush. And there was never anything remotely special about that guy to begin with, aside from the fact that Vince liked him because he was big. Oh, it's so frustrating. Well, and getting over my lack of enthusiasm for having to sit through yet another Crush match, the qualifier he had here with Tatanka was meh. Chief Jay Strongbow was out with Tatanka watching at ringside, and I think his facial expression kind of summed up my opinion having watched this match. Blank and uninterested. They did some basic stuff for a while. Crush cut off Tatanka for the heat right before their commercial pitch. Hilarious when they came back from break, and Crush had Tatanka in a standing bear hug, and Vince, with a straight face, casually saying, "Crush doing what he does best here." To which I asked, what? Having boring matches that put people to sleep? At least the heat was mercifully short. Tatanka milked a comeback on Crush while Mr. Fuji tried to... I wrote down hit the ring to make a run-in. It was more like Fuji pretended like he was capable of climbing up to the ring apron. And instead, Jay Strongbow cut him off at the pass with a weak-ass looking chop, and Fuji just sort of took a comedic bump. Looked like a plank of wood falling over, just so stiff. I mean, part of me feels bad for the guy, but looking back, why was Mr. Fuji out there taking bumps on Raw in 1994? The guy could literally do nothing physically. Just, I don't know. He seems so out of place out there. But finally, at the end, they had Crush and Tatanka both fight on the floor to where the ref ended up counting both men out. So as a result, neither guy wound up qualifying for the tournament, at least momentarily. Instead, they just had a sloppy post-match brawl until Todd Pettingill cut to the King of the Ring update. What mainly amounted to a lot of the same discussions we've been having regarding the pay-per-view. We did, however, get yet another Roddy Piper home video here. That is a pre-taped promo on Jerry Lawler ahead of their match. This one was... just about as wacky as the rest of them. As the caption reads, Roddy at home. Piper is standing there in his driveway petting his dog while he's hanging out in the back of a pickup truck. And, well, first he says he's no king, nor does he ever plan on being one. And he talks about growing up in a rough neighborhood in Oregon. Says that his trash talking with Lawler is getting tiresome. All these one-liner jabs they're throwing at each other. And at some point here, he brought up the children's organization for that hospital in Canada or wherever it was. And then he proceeded to get into the driver's seat of his pickup truck while the dog was still hanging out in the back. I take it PETA might have had a thing or two to say about that. All seriousness, I have no idea what the fuck Piper was talking about for the majority of this promo. I just sort of accepted that going into it. I was like, well, the other two promos haven't made a lick of sense. Why would I expect this to be any different? And it wasn't. It was still Piper being Piper. Somewhere in here, we also had Owen telling President Jack Tunney to make the right decision and grant Owen the bye in the first round of the tournament. Again, figuring Tatanka and Crush were both counted out. Makes rational sense to me. By all accounts, Owen should have automatically qualified for the semi-round. But, of course, they had the running theme going on with the ongoing speculation about what Tunney was going to do surrounding that controversial finish. A finish that more or less just made both wrestlers look like morons for allowing themselves to both get counted out. I mean, looking back, it's not like anybody was holding them back. They just decided to fight each other on the floor, and they both got punished for it. So, really, Owen was kind of in the right here. Well, in any case, while that story continues to simmer, if you thought the Roddy Piper pre-tapes were filmed from strange locations, how about the $1 Million Man hanging out at a funeral parlor? Why? Well, you see, the story is that Ted DiBiase is trying to communicate with The Undertaker. Moreover, he's trying to buy Undertaker's services. Yeah, I don't get it either. It makes about as much sense as you would expect it to. That being zero. But it is wacky cartoon WWF at its finest. Only Vince would come up with the idea. I got it, pal. Let's film something from a funeral home. That's such good shit. And only Ted DiBiase could pull it off. Really not much more to say about that weird little skit. Cutting back to the ring, we had the 1-2-3 Kid going up against George South, wherein the bulk of the conversation here came with Vince and Macho Man plugging Rush Limbaugh's then third wife. Because they've always got to sneak in those cultural references. Beyond that, though, they wrestled for a few minutes. Shawn did a lot of flashy kicks and strikes early on. South cut him off momentarily, and then Waltman fired back and won with a cradling pin. I believe Vince also noted something here about Adam Baum and Harvey Whippleman having their problems recently on television, teasing a possible split. Good. I'm glad. Probably the most useful thing Harvey's ever done as an on-screen manager in the WWF. But why don't we go ahead and talk about something noteworthy? This King's Court Talk segment with Jerry Lawler and Bret Hart. Of course, Lawler has to get in all his verbal jabs beforehand. I don't think I've ever heard anybody else in the history of this business, with the exception of Jerry Lawler, refer to the wrestling fans as peons. Is a fabulous insult. Almost as fabulous as the King continuing to mow down Bret's family. The feud that was unceremoniously dropped at the end of '93 when they really could have milked that program for more money. The weeks where Lawler was out there running down Stu and Helen on TV was some of the best material we had seen on Retro Raw up to that point. Here, I think Lawler had the line of the century when he said, "The other day, I told Stu Hart to act his age, so he died." Albeit that probably was not designed to get a pop out of me, but I laughed so hard. Kind of hilarious how Lawler's out there for like 2 minutes degrading Bret's family. And as soon as he introduces Bret here, he comes out high-fiving the fans and smiling. Never mind this fucking jag-off in the ring calling my mom and pop old hags. Got to make sure I get to slap hands with all the good people in the audience. Now, of course, Bret's clenching his fist when Lawler keeps the trash talking going. Told Bret to hold fire because he still had to introduce his other guest for the segment here. None other than Shawn Michaels and Diesel. And of course, you know that Diesel is currently scheduled to wrestle Bret for the WWF title at the pay-per-view. So naturally, they were going to have a standoff at some point. And all the while, Shawn Michaels, kind of just a third wheel out there. Total background player for the Diesel Bret hype. And, well, admittedly so. The back and forth exchange with Nash and Bret was more or less uninspiring. One of Diesel's lines was informing Brett that he will have a one-way ticket to the VIP section at King of the Ring. And I quote, "very intense pain," unquote. You have no idea how much I had to restrain myself from wanting to punch a hole through my TV hearing that line. God, that was so fucking awful. Ain't nothing cool about that line from Big Daddy Cool. That was Big Daddy crud. And well, the promo battle didn't last long before Shawn sucker punched Brett so the heels could all put the boots to him. Of course, Lawler had to get some slim pickings in there too, which was just fucking grand. What a prick. It was kind of comedic though. Like, you got Shawn and Lawler stomping a mud hole in Brett, and the referees are trying to run out to separate everybody. And meanwhile, there's Nash hounding all the refs like a guard dog in very cartoonish fashion. And like the refs have to pretend they can't just run a circle around Nash. It was goofy, but it's something. I talked about it before when they introduced this match. I had no memory of this title match ever happening. You know, obviously I remember some of the ladder work that Diesel and Brett would do for the belt, but this one, for whatever reason, slipped my mind entirely. I mean, for one, it was a very short-term program from what I remember, because obviously they were getting ready to set up the Owen-Brett rematch for SummerSlam. You know, this was all just kind of designated to give Brett something to do for a while. Speaking of guys with nothing to do, the Smoking Guns wrestled this week. I believe the job team they wrestled was Reno Riggins and Austin Steele. Poor Billy and Bart out there working a dead-end gimmick that was doomed to fail from the start. It only took him 4 years to resurrect Billy Gunn's career. Bart never really got out of the starting block. They did some sloppy power moves for a few minutes, some of which looked more impressive than others. I have no idea what the fuck this finish was, but I chalked it up to some Canadian backbreaker / elbow drop combo thing. That is exactly what I wrote down in my notes. Yeah, I think it's fair to say that I'm over the Smoking Guns. And I think I've seen a sum total of like 5 of their matches since they debuted up to this point. I forget when this team fizzles out, but hopefully it's sooner rather than later. Because, yeah, these guys ain't doing a whole lot for me on TV right now. But all of that was mainly a soft serve in order to pitch to Todd Pettingill again. We have some clarification regarding the fallout to the Tatanka Crush match from the opener. The official ruling from Jack Tunney is that there will be a rematch next week on Raw with Tatanka and Crush. And since it will be a King of the Ring qualifier, he is ensuring that this match will have a definite winner. Therefore, the match will be a lumberjack match. And in Todd's best efforts to try and rally up some gusto for this announcement, he begins rattling off a bunch of purported lumberjacks that'll be at ringside. Names like the Bushwhackers, IRS, Mabel, Nikolai Volkov, Yokozuna, and other potential names to be announced. I am shitting myself with excitement over what could possibly go down in that match. The endless possibilities of what those names could do in getting involved at ringside, while there's an ongoing match with Crush and Tatanka. Whew. My God, the talent pool in 1994. It was very subpar. Oddly enough here, though, no mention of Lex Luger. Now again, they were teasing the thing with him and Crush a couple weeks back, but notice how his name was left out from the equation here. And as far as I know, that program is still ongoing. So maybe we'll see a Lex Luger cameo next week. I mean, it was Crush that was responsible for getting Luger eliminated from the qualifier a few weeks ago. Maybe Luger's ready to return the favor. Who knows? But while we await that instant 5-star classic, let's go to our TV main event. Really not a whole lot to say about it. It's Double J Jeff Jarrett taking on Chris Hamrick. What I wrote down is looking like Ricky Morton if he gave up trying to go to the gym. Or just gave up eating entirely. Anyway, Jeff beat him up for a minute or two. Hamrick took some very comedic job guy bumps, barely clearing a back body drop at one point. I thought the guy was going to come down and land directly on the top of his head. But Jarrett ducked a running knee in the corner and ended up submitting him with a figure four. Meanwhile, the fans chanted, "We want Doink." And I retorted with, "Fuck you. No, we don't." I would have been mildly interested in the Double J versus Randy Savage feud, as they were somewhat teasing during the exchange at the end here. But then you realize that Savage is only around for a couple more months before he leaves for WCW. And looking back, I don't know if Vince would have ever greenlit a Jeff Jarrett versus Randy Savage feud. Would have been good, but with where Double J was in the pecking order in the company, I don't think he would have signed off on it. I imagine it would have been better than Jarrett versus Doink, but call me crazy. But they also used that to set up another Lawler announcement right before the show ended. Yet another King's Court edition for next week being advertised. And his special guest, even though he didn't outright mention the name here, I believe we were led to believe that it was going to be Roddy Piper. Here's the issue, though. It almost sounds too good to be true. Now, Lawler mentioned that his guest will be a guy from Scotland who wears a dress and a t-shirt that reads Hot Rod. Didn't explicitly say that it was going to be Piper, though, so I don't know. I smell a ruse coming. Now, with the way Vince and Savage sold it, I think they were a little too confident that we would actually get Piper on next week's Raw, that Jerry Lawler would live up to his word, but guess we'll wait and find out what trick he has up his sleeve. But it was a good hooking point. And honestly, what really is there to take away from this show beyond their main plot development was the continuation of Tatanka versus Crush? I think that about sums up all you need to know. I mean, they did a little bit of advancement with the story of Brett and Diesel for the WWF title, but man, even that program seems like it's missing something. I mean, they're trying to keep the King of the Ring hype on everybody's mind, but I'm looking at this card right now with the brackets in front of me, and it's not an all-star lineup. And meanwhile, their selling point for next week is check out the show for Tatanka versus Crush Round 2. Mid. It's what I thought after the show was over, man. I'm like, what would MJF say about that one? He would say that was very mid. Speaking of mid, guess it would be a good point to get things going with some of the modern wrestling talk from over the weekend. Figured I'd just go in sequential order of the shows here so I don't have to jump around in my notes. The Night of Champions show that WWE hosted on The Cock. That was a thing that happened on Saturday afternoon, Eastern time. I got home around 4:30-ish, and I wound up watching the show and getting to bed all before 11 p.m. So I consider that a massive accomplishment. The AEW pay-per-view the following night dragged me through the mud a little bit. I don't think I got to bed till well after midnight by the time that was all over. But I guess those are the perks to watching a pay-per-view hosted in a different time zone. I don't know what the hour differences are between Saudi Arabia and here in the States, but Getting to watch a mid-afternoon WWE live special, I'll take that over the usual 7 or 8 p.m. Eastern start time. Now, when it comes to the Night of Champions show, there were basically 3 main talking points coming out of it. They had 3 big featured matches on the card, and everything else was just kind of void filler. In the case of void filler, it left a lot to be desired by the end of it. But for 3 hours and some change, nah. Didn't bother me as much as it probably would have, say, if the show went like 4.5 hours. I always talk about how the 4th hour fatigue usually kicks in for me once these pay-per-views really start to drag. I would say this was a reasonable pay-per-view length. If they'd have cut like 2 of the girls' matches and just boiled everything down to 1, probably would have been a lot more tolerable, but them's the breaks. By the way, I love how they advertise this show as having 3 main events. And one of those alleged 3 main event matches was, of course, the curtain jerker. Yes, a main event match to open the card. Kind of defeats the purpose of referring to it as a main event. But then again, this is coming from the same company that tries to insinuate that there are 3 main events on one card. Guess it all depends on your proper definition of what actually constitutes a main event match. Normally, for my money, there's a singular main event match for a pay-per-view card, and that's the match that goes on last. At least that's how traditionally it was viewed. And then, of course, there's the semi-main and all the prelim stuff that happens beforehand. Occasionally you might get a special attraction match here and there, but, well, it's a Vince thing. I don't know if I ever bought the idea of them having 3 main event matches on a singular card, but this is the kind of stuff that Vince likes to do. But looking past all that, one of their featured matches here, it's the match to crown their World Heavyweight Champion on Raw. All because some brain trust woke up one day and decided, you know what? Remember when we had that title unification match a couple years ago and we had Roman win both of the world titles so we could finally just have one world champion in the company? Well, throw that idea out the window. Now we're going to have 2 world champions again. Because why not? All because they didn't want Cody to beat Roman at Mania this year. So they went ahead and royally fucked up everything as a result. Gee, I wonder who was responsible for that decision. Now we've come full circle here at Night of Champions, where in order to crown a new World Heavyweight Champion on Raw, their final bracket in the tournament is pinning a Raw guy versus a SmackDown guy, even though that SmackDown guy literally just got drafted from Raw over to SmackDown, and now forget it. The whole thing's a fucking disaster. For those that need clarification, though, it's Seth Rollins versus AJ Styles. And of course, when Seth's booked for a match, his theme song is going to be more over than anything he does in the frickin' match, period. They probably strategically put him out there first for that very reason, figuring the fans were going to be hot from the jump. Also, they could sit there and go, oh my God almighty, that song. It also made it virtually impossible to tell who I was supposed to cheer for. I haven't been able to figure out Seth's gimmick in years. He's had go-away heat with me since 2020. But the people love chanting his music. I also thought AJ was a babyface, but he really wasn't getting much of a warm reception from the Saudi crowd here. In trying to look past some of the psychological dynamics, when AJ won that semifinal round on SmackDown a couple weeks ago and they put up the graphic to plug this match, first thing I said was, it should be a good match. Despite every bad thing I've ever said about WWE's gimmick repackaging of Seth Rollins over the years. The guy's a remarkable in-ring talent. He knows what he's doing. It's kind of the one reliable thing you can always guarantee about Seth as a worker. Come bell time, he's not going to slack off. Of course, AJ's right up there with him in terms of ring ability. I don't ever recall seeing these guys wrestle in WWE before. If they have, I apologize for never having remembered it. But the chemistry seemed to instantly click from the opening bell here. And yeah, a lot of it was back and forth. Kind of in the ballpark of one of those main event style matches where it's a lot of high impact moves, lots of drama being milked around the kickouts and the near falls. Generally, I don't have any complaints about the moves they did, per se. I'm still not really a big fan of that superplex into the Falcon Arrow combination that Seth does. Like, visually, it looks impressive because it takes a lot of strength to be able to hoist a guy up like that and then immediately pick him up into another suplex. Then again, it also kind of exposes the superplex spot because instead of both guys taking the brunt of the impact and then selling it, like they both have to no-sell it in order to transition into another move directly afterwards. It's dumb. I don't really like it. But, like I said, it was a really strong match. Other than some minor gripes here and there, I don't really have any issues with the work from either guy. It's just the artificially contrived nature of this whole secondary world champion thing that rubs me the wrong way. Like, I hated the idea of it from the start. And while it doesn't directly affect our SmackDown reviews going forward, since this is a belt that'll be a mainstay on Raw, it still doesn't change my perception of it. It further validates my argument that the only reason they did this was because they were too stubborn to take the belt off of Roman. And even if the end goal is for Cody to become world champion at some point, especially if it ends up being this belt instead of the one that Roman currently possesses, it'll be even dumber. It'll just be WWE's cop-out way of saying, well, they got to the end goal of Cody winning the big one. Except the only problem is that he ended up winning the secondary world title as opposed to the only one worth giving a crap about. Like I said, none of this makes any sense. If they would have just put the Universal title on Cody at Mania, had him feud with Brock Lesnar over the title for the time being, and send Roman away for a little while and try to start a new direction with the top babyface champion running the ship, all these problems could have easily been avoided. Now we're back to square one with having two world champions right now, and it's just muddy the waters unnecessarily. For absolutely no reason, too. And that's the infuriating part. Plus, now every time Seth defends the title on a premium live special, I'm going to have to watch him swim down the aisleway with that fucking belt around his waist. And all the fans will keep chanting, oh. At this stage, I may as well just put a gun in my mouth. Oh yeah, and I sort of glossed over the end result here. Seth won. As if it took a rocket scientist to see that one coming a mile away. I mean, it's kind of whatever. The thing you can always rely on with Seth is that the guy's going to stay healthy. Knock on wood. I mean, he's not really injury prone. Aside from that one freak accident several years ago where he blew out his ACL and was on the shelf for like 9 months. He's been a constant on the programming for a while, so at least you can bank on them getting some mileage out of him as the top champion on Raw. Who the hell they feud him with? I mean, your guess is as good as mine. Fuck if I know. Maybe if I took the time to actually look at the roster, I may be able to give you some opinions, but man, I don't know if I'd be able to give you 3 quality opponents for Seth to feud with over that title. Discount maybe Cody. It's entirely possible with what happened in the Brock-Cody match later on, they could maybe be setting up Brock to feud with Seth. Maybe that might work as a short-term thing. We've also seen that match done to death. Seth versus Brock really isn't a fresh matchup. So what are they really gaining out of this at the end of the day? How long do they plan on keeping Seth as the inaugural champion? I don't think this is a case where you can only keep the belt on Seth for like 2 or 3 months and then start hot potatoing the thing around. Like, Seth needs to stay champion for at least the remainder of the year in order to give that belt some credibility. And then your dilemma is going to come up where you ask, are there enough quality heels to send at Rollins from now until January of 2024? Who the hell is this guy supposed to feud with over the belt? I mean, these are issues that I guarantee nobody's thought of yet. Because, again, it was fucking stupid to even have the secondary world title to begin with. But what the hell do I know? I'm just some geek on the internet with opinions that don't matter. Anyway, moving on from that thing. For our sanctioned women's match on the card, sponsored by Spandex Bodysuits, it's Trish Stratus versus Becky Lynch, taking the only good qualities about the female talent involved in shielding everything, that being their entire fucking bodies. And you know, whatever. I get it. You know, it's something the girls are going to have to do if they're going to wrestle in Saudi Arabia. I think the bodysuits look stupid, but I get it's part of the culture. Government doesn't want anything exploitive being shown on camera, so fine. I mean, if you remove the fact that Becky looked like she was ready for her first space expedition out there in that bright yellow jumpsuit, I can sort of look past all that. With that all said, the match here still kind of sucked. No offense to Trish, but I mean, there's only so much you're going to be able to do physically in your late 40s. It's not to say that Trish was ever Ricky Steamboat in the ring either. Like, in her prime, she was sort of the big fish in a small pond with the talent she had to work with at the time. She was never all that great in the ring from what I remember. And, of course, that was when she was 20 years younger. Now she's older, has a few more wrinkles. Her ass is about 10 times flatter since she started doing yoga. Gotta be honest, I kind of spaced out watching this match. I mean, it wasn't train wreck level horrible or anything, but it was just mildly uninteresting. I don't know when Trish turned heel, but I vaguely remember Becky and Trish being part of that winning team at WrestleMania a few months back. Wasn't Lita part of that team too? I mean, I figured this heel turn didn't happen all that long ago. I don't know why she decided to become bitch Trish all of a sudden, but I mean, I always thought heel Trish was kind of hot. That wasn't until Mickie James got involved and started trying to have all the kinky sex with her on live TV, and things got really spicy in a hurry. But that was from another time. The finish was kind of out of left field. And again, since I've been building up most of this feud on Raw, I haven't really been paying all that close attention to it. Was the Zoe Stark thing supposed to be an actual swerve? Or has she been heavily involved with the Trish-Becky thing from the start? Because Cole and Graves were selling it like they didn't have any idea what was going on, but I don't know if Zoe's made an actual on-camera appearance on the main roster yet. I'm not a huge fan of the whole wrestler hides under the ring for the sneak attack spot. You know, especially when it's absurd to believe the idea that Zoe would willingly plant herself under the ring for the entire day just to cost Becky a fucking wrestling match. But if you remove the smart fan of me talking, I like Zoe Stark. I thought she had a lot of potential in NXT right before the whole rebranding thing that happened, and kind of stopped paying attention to that show entirely. But she was good from what I remember. Her costing Becky the match and possibly aligning herself with Trish as some kind of muscle enforcer. It's not how I would have gone about pushing her on the main roster, but they've certainly done worse with talent in the past. I did kind of laugh at the idea of Trish getting a pin over Becky in 2023, especially after that semi-botched Stratusfaction move. God, she never hit that move well, and she's still doing it all these years later. But whatever. like I said, match wasn't terrible, just wasn't all that engaging. Probably went about 5 minutes too long. I don't really know why they felt the need to try and stretch this thing out to like 15 minutes when they easily could have done it in like 10. But again, since a lot of this feud has been happening on Raw, I can only judge it based on what I saw here. Looks like they're going to continue the feud again, so I'll probably have to watch this match at SummerSlam at some point. But I really don't have much of an opinion on it one way or the other. I mean, I have my opinions on the way they've utilized Becky Lynch since she came back from maternity leave, but I don't really want to spend another 25 minutes ranting about the mismanagement of talent. That was followed with our Let's Give the Home Country Man a Pat on the Back title shot match. Even though the Home Country Man was actually born in Chicago. But we'll throw him a bone anyway. It's Gunther defending the Intercontinental Championship against Mustafa Ali, or Mustafa Ali, however we're pronouncing it now. And before I even get into any logistics about the match, I love the idea that the story behind this entire match was, hey Corey, do you think Mustafa stands any chance of winning? Well, you know, Cole, I crunched some numbers, did some high-level calculus to try and come to a rational conclusion here, and the answer is a definitive no. No joke. That was literally the extent of the conversation that Cole and Graves had here. They immediately counted this poor motherfucker out before the opening lockup. Hell of a way to sell your babyface to the audience. You dolts. Peons. To borrow a Lawler quote. I mean, and while they gave Ali some hope spots here and there, the commentators really weren't proved all that wrong at the end of the day. Ali proceeded to get his ass kicked for about 80% of the fight. Gunther got stunned one or two times so Ali could get a near fall. And then Gunther just sort of fired back and continued to beat the shit out of Ali until he hit him with a shotgun dropkick in the corner and then killed him with a powerbomb. So thanks for coming, Ali. I mean, not that anybody that was really expecting him to win the strap here. You know, I haven't brought up the name Mustafa Ali in a hot minute here on the channel. What's the last thing that guy was involved with prior to him getting a fluke win to become the number one contender here? I remember there was a brief period like 2 or 3 years ago, might have been right before the scamdemic, where they were sort of pushing Ali as an underneath babyface, and he was sort of gaining some traction with the people right before they yanked the proverbial rug out from under him. Ali completely forgot the guy existed until I saw him show up to face Gunther here. And then I remembered, oh yeah, that guy's still employed, huh? I mean, I wish I could say more about it, but that's all I got. I hate to have to plug Gunther into that void filler talking point from earlier, but that was kind of his role on the card here. And if you asked me at the end of the year, what was Gunther doing on that Night of Champions show in Saudi Arabia? I'd probably say, fuck if I remember, dude. Arguably nothing all that memorable. But that was more or less that match. But what do we have next? Oh, that's right. The match for the Raw Women's title, even though I believe the current Raw champion is wrestling exclusively on SmackDown now. So fucking stupid. Can't stress that enough. That's Bianca Belair defending against Asuka after the dreaded missed angle of doom, where Bianca got blinded with a toxic green mist for all of 1 week before showing up the following week perfectly fine. And it's so bizarre to me, man. For the life of me, I've been sitting here trying to figure out if I'm missing something, or maybe if revisionist history is just catching up with me a bit. Look, you all know me. I am unashamedly one of those dudes that will sit here and tell you with a straight face, by and large, I'm just not a big fan of modern women's wrestling with the way it's presented in 2023. I think a lot of the female talent on the market today is very mediocre at best. I don't think it warrants or justifies any of the major wrestling organizations trying to evenly distribute time between men's and women's segments. More often than not, I think it just weighs the shows down a lot of the time. I mean, WWE is more guilty of this than AEW, but Asuka is such a weird story in WWE. I remember her matches in NXT like 5 or 6 years ago. I remember her being great at the time. I remember her being one of the sole highlights of those shows at one point. I'm sitting here in 2023 watching the same performer. It's the same girl. Something's not clicking. I'm just not digging her vibe the same way I once was. Could be the presentation, could be the lack of mystique surrounding the gimmick. Now that they dropped the whole undefeated streak with her and just made her another girl on the roster. I mean, she doesn't really come off like a special attraction like she once did. And again, her matches just, they're not clicking like they used to. This is another weird occasion, too, where the fans were not really digging Bianca. Maybe it's just the foreign crowds for whatever reason, but people aren't really seeming to buy Bianca as a babyface. Now, granted, this wasn't so much like the EO match last month where Asuka is the definitive babyface because, I mean, the crowd was more or less tepid toward her, too. They weren't really booing her necessarily, but they weren't really reacting to her all that much. Maybe it was just the general fact that no one really cared about the match, period. I mean, it was okay. I wouldn't say it was good. In some ways, better than the Trish-Becky match. But what's that really saying at the end of the day? It's sort of like asking what smells worse, a dead skunk or a fresh pile of dog shit. Definitely an improvement with the bodysuits this go around. I'll give the girls that for going out of their way to customize their outfits. But again, nah. I mean, they gave this one almost 15 minutes as well. Maybe could have shaved off a few minutes and wrap up the match a little bit sooner. Because again, the crowd was sort of sitting on their hands for a lot of it. Not really reacting, not really getting into anything. I think there were some mild "this is awesome" chants that quickly fizzled out when it became obvious that nobody was on board with it. Those are always awkward. By the way, did anybody else hear Cole refer to Asuka as Oscar at one point? Had to have been a Freudian slip. I highly doubt anybody on this program is listening to Jim Cornette's podcast, but I thought that was mildly amusing. I have no idea what the hell was going on toward the finish here, but am I nuts or did something just go totally haywire in the last few minutes? I don't know if the girls got lost, gave up trying, or what the hell happened here. Okay, so at one point, the girls are on the floor fighting, and Jessica Carr is initiating the 10 count. And they're kind of just standing there awkwardly for a few minutes and waiting for the other to do something. So they just started trading some limp dick forearms that looked horrible beyond belief. They end up doing a spot in the corner where the ref's trying to get in between both of them, and Asuka goes to do the spit spot, but came nowhere close to making contact with Bianca. And after some awkward facial exchanges, they just kept doing some spots. Bianca had a big old blue splotch on her ass from the food coloring spit take. And in probably one of the more lackluster finishes I remember seeing in quite a while, Asuka goes under the bottom rope to spit more blue food coloring onto her hand. And when Bianca goes to hoist her up for the KOD, Asuka gouges at Bianca's eyes to temporarily blind her again. And Asuka just hits Bianca with a roundhouse kick and pins her. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, ending Bianca's long-standing title reign after, like, whatever it was, 400-something days. Just like that. All it took for them to end it was the spit take finish. And that's how they got the belt off of her. which really didn't even resonate with me until Cole brought it up on commentary. I mean, okay. If that's what they thought was going to be the right call, more power to them. I mean, I'm more so ambivalent about the title switch, if I'm being honest. You still got the problem of having a SmackDown exclusive talent holding onto a belt that currently belongs to the other brand. Apparently, that problem will continue to be unaddressed until the end of time. But, I mean, I don't see this as a scenario where people are going to be shitting on the decision to switch over the belt either. I've sort of been of the opinion that Bianca's needed some kind of shakeup for a while, whether it's a heel turn, a new, more aggressive side to her personality, maybe just sending her away for a while so we can get a break. I don't know, but Bianca's been pretty stale for a while. And I like her. I've had nothing but good things to say about Bianca since I started watching her in NXT. I think her run as a heel in developmental was some of the best career work she ever did. Being a bitchy heel, flipping her braids around and being all obnoxious and cutting those girl promos, like, they were entertaining. Now, granted, her face run on the main roster got over to an extent, but I don't know, the whole smiley, hair-twirling, crowd-pleasing babyface Bianca, I mean, that was eventually going to overstay its welcome at some point. I think people are just kind of fed up with it, to be honest. So I'm not entirely opposed to the title switch, or just doing something different with Bianca, period. You know, if she goes away for a while and comes back with a fresh repackage, I'm all for it. For now, I don't really know what to expect. Guess we can all patiently wait for Charlotte Flair to make her evident comeback so she can barrel through the curtain and fuck everything up again. Because you know that program's coming. Oh my God. You know WWE's salivating at the mouth to get Charlotte reunited with her longtime rival, Asuka. Can't wait to see how they fuck it up this time. Probably have Asuka go out there and job to Charlotte in 30 seconds. In the first title defense. Because that's the kind of thing that WWE would do with that overrated botch fest. Ugh. Don't even get me started. Do not even get me started. Fuck Charlotte. So at this point, we come to a crossroads in the pay-per-view special. At this stage, I had already sat through 2 girls' matches, neither of which was particularly good. So naturally, I was already kind of burnt out with the women's wrestling by this point. And then I saw that the next match, immediately following the Raw women's title match, yet another fucking girls match. This time for the other belt on the brand that doesn't currently represent its corresponding title. Now it's Natalya versus Rhea Ripley. And I love Rhea. I got nothing against Natty. But there's not a god in this world that is going to get me to sit through 2 back-to-back girls matches. Not a chance in fucking hell. I don't care how good Rhea is. That is a hard pass for me, dog. I'm good with the whole 50-50 egalitarian mindset of booking equal amount of men's and women's matches on wrestling cards. I mean, they give the girls ample enough screen time on the TV shows most weeks. I don't really feel the need to have to watch 3 girls match on 1 pay-per-view card. So I got up to go to the bathroom during this. I also made a pit stop to the laundry room to check on my current progress in the washer. I was out of the room for maybe a subtotal of 5 minutes at most. When I came back in the room, they were already in the middle of promoting the Cody Brock video package and getting ready to transition into that match. So unless the Rhea Natty match was kept on the short side, like well under 3 minutes, I don't really think I missed a whole lot. That must have been a quick in and out deal. Or maybe I was just gone for longer than I thought, but I don't think I was gone for that long. So I'll have to check up on that afterward and see what happened in that match, because now I'm kind of curious. But with that said, I went ahead and proceeded with the match that followed. At least I had some relative form of patience by this point in the show, so I was not about to lose it all before the two featured main event bouts. We had the one-armed Cody Rhodes versus Brock Lesnar. They said, fuck it. Cody's worked magic once before with a legit handicap injury, where one side of his body was practically numb and immobile. Let's do another injury story with Cody being forced to go out there and wrestle. Only this time it's a work. And of course, his opponent this time will be Chicken Leg Brock. Now, again, precursor before we break down the match here. Calculate up every point I just made earlier about how this feud should have been a title program with Cody as the top babyface champion defending against the heel Lesnar. The fact that this whole feud is literally about nothing but bragging rights, apparently, to me is just so bizarre. A Cody versus Brock program with no stipulations or no titles is just... I don't know. It all seemed like it was missing a purpose. Why is Brock mad at Cody? Why did Brock target Cody to begin with? What is the reason for stretching this feud out after Backlash when Cody already got the clean, decisive win over Brock? I don't know. To me, this all just comes across as WWE's way of trying to keep Cody busy and relevant without directly having him chase the title. It's like their way of trying to distract us from the story they were building up with him prior to WrestleMania before he lost. Now it's just kind of like busy work for him. With all that said, they went into this thing kind of treating round 2 as an extended angle rather than a legit wrestling match. You know, they shot the deal with Brock injuring Cody on Raw. The announcers gave us the medical update that Cody was going into this thing with a kayfabe broken arm. But of course, Cody's too passionate to walk away from the fight, even with the major drawback. And I think if we judge everything based on the premise of the way they executed the story here, the idea that we were supposed to be sympathetic toward Cody's condition, I mean, this did about as fine a job as you would expect. Brock had a ton of heat going in there and practically decimating Cody. You know, early on, Cody was working the mind game trickery and trying to lure Brock outside the ring and do the cat and mouse chase thing. And of course, as soon as Brock scooped up Cody and started throwing him around the ring, I mean, that's basically when everything got flipped on its head. You know, I did like the announcers drawing attention to the cast gimmick and talking about how Cody has a built-in leverage in using the cast since it wasn't technically an illegal weapon. So, you know, he would give Brock some stiff shots to the head and got a few hope spots in there. But the main story was mostly centered around Brock catching Cody in the Kimura lock. And while Brock's basically got his entire body wrapped around Cody like an anaconda, Cody's refusing to tap out to the submission hold. Brock's wrenching back on his arm for like 3 minutes straight. Granted, there was a point where they were really milking the drama with that hold. You know, and while it was fantastic with Cody being able to get the fans to rally behind him after he's trying to fight through that pain and refusing to give up, the idea that Cody with a broken arm would be able to survive almost 3 or 4 minutes with his fucking monster cranking on his arm as hard as humanly possible, it was a little John Cena-esque for my liking. Like, suspension of disbelief is one thing, but Cody's not fucking Wolverine. It's a little cartoonish there for my liking. But, you know, in terms of keeping the people alive and valiantly rooting for Cody to fight and reach the ropes to break the hold, and when Cody finally managed to break the hold, people popped for it. And they basically spent another minute or two with going through some sequences where Cody's trying to fight back, but he ends up getting caught with the F5, kicked out of that. And then Brock immediately wraps Cody up in the second Kimura, and that's essentially when Cody finally passed out and they awarded the match to Brock. You know, again, the story worked for what it was designed to do. It was definitely a more old school heat angle than anything else. You kind of had to figure that Brock would wind up going over here, especially with them introducing the whole broken arm gimmick. figuring this is leading to some kind of rubber match, probably what'll end up getting blown off at SummerSlam in July. Seems fairly obvious. Again, though, it's just one of those dilemmas where you look at the entire idea of this feud on paper and you think, okay, but again, why exactly are these guys feuding? It's a program spotlighting two of their upper mid-card main event level guys. But again, they sort of launched right into this thing after WrestleMania, and based on what I've seen, they're yet to really explain why Brock picked a fight with Cody to begin with. Wasn't that part of Cody's promo right before the Backlash match where he came out on SmackDown and was trying to figure out why Brock picked a fight with him? What was Brock's beef? I don't think we ever found out the answer, other than he's Brock Lesnar, fee, fi, fo, fum. He's mad. So he's going to beat Cody up because he feels like it. I mean, it's not entirely out of the realm of possibilities because Brock Lesnar is a miserable human being, both in kayfabe and as a shoot. But I'm still of the opinion that a program like this should have been higher caliber. Like, there needed to be some kind of higher stakes on the line. Stipulations, titles. I don't know. I mean, Cody losing didn't really hurt him because they gave him an outing with a kayfabe injury. I am curious to see how they decide to blow this off as a third stipulation. I mean, do they do a cage match? Do they resort to the prototypical plunder match? Not really sure. But I think the aftermath is what we ought to be paying special attention to. And I'm not talking about the blow-off with Cody going over. I'm talking about after they wrap up this feud entirely. Because after the Brock thing, seeing which belt they send Cody after is going to be the real interesting story. Now that they have two world champions, do they try to go back to the well with him and Roman and recapture that lightning in a bottle again? Or are they going to steer in a completely different direction and have Cody pursue the secondary belt? Thus confirming our worst suspicions that the only reason they created a secondary world title was to make sure that Cody didn't pin Roman. And they're probably saving that spot for Solo next year at Mania. That's what I'm worried about. Again, that's a conversation we can have at a later time once we figure out what next year's WrestleMania game plan is, but I'm on the fence about some of this stuff, man. I'm kind of skeptical about the direction they've taken Cody after Mania. And again, now that you have a secondary world championship added into the fray, it's going to get really hairy in there. Especially with the current direction they're taking Roman and the Bloodline stuff. Speaking of such, oh yeah. Looking back, glad I skipped over that third girls match. Because sanity prevailed here. The Cody Brock match gave me a boost of energy, but by the time this main event was over, it was like getting an extra dose of caffeine from a shot of espresso. That's a compliment, by the way, and I know my analogies aren't always that obvious. So our main event. Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens defending the undisputed tag team titles against Roman Reigns and Solo Sikoa. Or is it just Solo now? Because, you know, Vince. This is a match that I watched from beginning to end, totally immersed in everything that happened in front of me, and considering how long the match lasted, I was shocked I was able to stay engaged for that long, too. I can't remember what the timestamp was for this, but at the point they started airing the Bloodline promo package, I mean, there was at least a solid 45 minutes left in the show by this point. And I thought, this match is either going about a half hour tops, or the entrances are going to take up about 20. And I think it wound up being the former, even though the entrances still took way too goddamn long. And while I mentioned how they did a good job getting the heat on Brock from the previous match with Cody, boy howdy, man. You have never seen nuclear heat from a Saudi crowd until they put Roman out there to trash talk those fans. I was worried for the guy. Like, I'm watching Roman out there badmouth the fans and tell them to go pound sand while the heels are getting the heat on the faces here. I'm like, Roman, pump the brakes a little bit there, dog. Gotta watch yourself. You never know which one of these whack job fans are going to hop the guardrail with a pocket knife and try to go to town on you when you're not looking. It was good stuff, but a little dicey there. I was a little concerned. And the thing with Sammy is that he has the Arabic ethnicity, in addition to him being French-Canadian. It's crazy. That guy has such an interesting background of cultural origin. But just like he was super over in Canada when they did the thing with him and Roman earlier this year, comes out here wearing that Arabic robe. I forget what the term for that is, but he got a really big warm reception here. Cut the promo in Arabic to the fans for the baby faces, doing the whole introduction. Of course, they all cheered him for that. I mean, the guy was practically a saint to the people. And I never actually put all that much thought into the idea that, if I'm not mistaken, I think this is the first time that Sammy and KO ever traveled to do any of these Saudi shows. For as long as they've been running these events overseas, is this the first one that Sammy and Owens traveled to wrestle? Because this is a special occasion for the fans, too. Just like the match with Sammy and Roman in Montreal, they were milking the crowd reactions for all they were worth. Taking their time early on, not rushing into anything, letting the fans blister Solo and Roman. You know, Roman doing a fantastic job firing back at the fans and letting Sammy get under his skin. You know, Sammy, of course, always takes a good ass beating, so during the early stages, you got the heels cutting off Sammy and working him over. Again, they're not going 100 miles an hour from the opening gate. They know they have plenty of time to work with, so everything is sequential and they're building up to the big spots. And they let Sammy sell for a while so Owens could get in there and try to feed a comeback. He's hitting some big moves on Roman and getting a near fall or two. He winds up getting blindsided and worked over for a while. They end up doing a spot where Owens gives Roman the stunner, and Roman bounces off the ropes and comes back and spears Owens out of his boots. So they're down for a minute trying to get to their corners to make the tag. Of course, Sammy's able to get in there and make the comeback on Solo. You know, good stuff with them building to the bigger impact moves. Everything actually comes off like it's building to a climax instead of reaching the peak midway through and then petering off afterwards. And obviously, what they're building towards is the big ref bump spot at the end. Granted, that was a little manufactured in the way they executed it. Like, I could have called that spot the minute before they even set it up. Like, I'm watching the ref try to get himself into position to take the spear from Roman, and when it finally happens, I was like, oh, there it is. That was rather predictable. But of course, he goes down, so that opens up the door for the Usos to get involved. I don't remember which direction they came from. It might have been through the crowd, but they go after Owens on the floor when he goes to set up Roman on the announce desk. They end up burying Owens under the rubble, and they end up targeting Sammy in the ring. A couple of super kicks connect on him, and this is a great spot here, purely based on the crowd reaction alone. Because when Jimmy and Jay set up for the stereo super kick on Sammy, but he low bridges them and they both wind up kicking Solo instead, that wasn't like a, ooh, crowd reaction. That was like an, oh shit, crowd reaction. Because when they put the camera on Roman, saw the whole thing go down, that guy is pissed. And even the announcers in their stern delivery are just going, what the hell did the Usos just do? And of course, Roman gets in there and starts pie-facing Jimmy and Jay, tells them they fucked everything up and to get out of his ring. And tensions are boiling. You know something's going to go down. And this is the point where after Roman has his attention directed towards Jay, when he turns around, he gets blindsided by the thrust kick from Jimmy. And they got that perfect camera shot focused on Jimmy. He's just selling it like a deranged wild man that's lost his ever-loving mind. Looks like Ralphie straight out of the Christmas Story, where he just blows up on Scott Farkas after having been bullied for the entire length of the film. And of course, Jay's beside himself. He has no idea what to do. He's totally frozen. Jimmy's telling him that it's just him and Jay now. There's no going back after that chess move. Jimmy tells Jay that he's doing what Jay should have done a long time ago. And finally, Jimmy gives Roman that one final kick to the head. Roman goes tumbling out of the ring like a dead carcass. And finally, the Usos take a powder and leave. Jimmy sees Solo start to stir in the corner, and he's like, bro, we gotta go. We gotta go. And I kind of laughed at that. It's like the monster rising from the ashes, and they ain't about to stick around to see what the aftermath is. But of course, Solo gets to his feet, and he's kind of dazed and confused about what just happened. So Owens comes up from the back and hits him with a stunner. Sets up Sammy for the haluva kick in the corner. 1, 2, 3. Actually, a very delayed 1, 2, 3 with the second ref kind of blowing his spot. It was more like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 count. And, obviously the fans pop for the finish. Definitely a good babyface triumph over the heels moment. And, again, the match went a very long time. A lot of action they packed into it. But I was totally immersed. When I look back and see everything they did from start to finish, this might sound crazy, but I almost kind of wish they may have booked this as the main event at WrestleMania Night 1. Instead of the Usos versus Owens and Zayn. Because this almost felt more like a cathartic payoff than, just seeing Sammy and Owens straight up win the titles from the Usos. That was a good moment in and of itself, but I don't know, with the way this entire match was laid out, this had more of a WrestleMania vibe to it. Especially with that finishing sequence. It was really damn good, man. This was one of those matches where, despite the spotty track record of how they followed up the Bloodline story post-Mania, I really had trouble finding fault with virtually anything that happened here. The Bloodline thing kind of stagnated on the SmackDown shows, almost like they didn't really have a definitive idea of how they wanted to get to this point, but they kind of have me hooked again. Now I kind of want to see what the fallout is with everything that's going to happen with Jimmy and Jay on the TV shows. The whole implosion of the Bloodline was the main thing that Sammy kept drawing our attention to. He's been telling Jimmy and Jay that this was bound to happen. This moment would come. And that's exactly what happened. What it exactly leads to afterwards, I don't entirely know. Do they wind up doing Solo and Roman versus Jimmy and Jay at SummerSlam as a big featured attraction match? Could be. Maybe that's where they start teasing the Solo split and get him prepped to go his own way in 2024 as a singles guy. Either way they do it, the Bloodline story, it's kind of run its course by now. I don't really see them trying to make Jimmy or Jay singles guys going after Roman for the Universal title. Solo, yes, I could totally buy that. But the Usos are a different pickle entirely. The biggest issue is that they can't both beat Roman for the title, so if they wanted to do Roman versus Jimmy or Roman versus Jay for the title, one of those guys has to lose. Solo, on the other hand, seems like he'd be more profitable as a long-term guy, dethroning Roman in next year's WrestleMania and becoming the singles champion. That seems like a more suitable option on the table. Where that leaves Jimmy and Jay, I'm not entirely sure, unless they were to somehow get involved in that match somehow. But, again, this is leaving me curious to see what it all leads to for SummerSlam. As of now, Solo and Roman are a pretty bound unit. I don't see that split happening until a little later on. Jimmy and Jay, on the other hand, It's hard to say, really. Again, I don't really buy them as single stars individually, but man, for a guy like me that's been complaining that the Usos are really dry and definitely need some kind of revamping to get me to care about their matches again, I don't know, maybe the duplicate singles pushes aren't such a bad idea. Maybe that's something we can stir about as we push forward to the Friday show. But I think for now, I'm going to push forward with the AEW pay-per-view report because I want to try and get through that as quickly as humanly possible. Overall, though, I would say this is a very solid WWE special. Yeah, the middle portion of the show with the undercard stuff was kind of blech. Again, 3 girls matches on one card to me is just ridiculous. And I don't care who's working the card, man. 2 girls matches for a pay-per-view special is enough in my book. 3 is about testing my patience. But, I mean, if I look past that, especially in factoring how damn good that main event was, I give this one a solid thumbs up. Reasonable pay-per-view length, all the big featured matches delivered by their own right, and the crowd was hot. So, I don't really have any major complaints about anything I saw. Fine stuff. Good effort. And then there was the AEW pay-per-view, which did a real thorough job in burning off any last remaining brain cells I had. Jesus H. Christ on a cracker. You know, when I got done watching this thing on Sunday night, more like Monday morning by the time everything actually concluded, you know what I thought to myself? I thought, there was so much wrong with this show, and if I tried to sit here and run down bullet point by bullet point everything that I found wrong, I mean, we'd have to trace our steps all the way back to the conversations we had about Tony Khan just not being equipped for the job as a booker. Because when I previewed this card on the Friday show, I looked at everything on paper from top to bottom, and I don't even think I brought this up at the time because I was just sort of amazed by the clusterfuck booking of this card. But did you notice a pattern? If not, open up the wiki page right now and take a look at the results real quick. Every single solitary match on this card, from top to bottom, even if you include the pre-show, was either a multi-person match or an unnecessary gimmick match, with the exception, the only 2 advertised matches on the card that were actual singles matches with no stipulations or gimmicks attached, minus the fact that they were both title matches. And of course, they were the girls' matches. None of the men on this card had one single solitary straight match. None. Everything was gimmicked up. Everything had some kind of hardcore or weapon stipulation attached to it. And you know what the sad part is? I never even put 2 and 2 together on that until I saw this thing unfold. How is that possible? Aside from the simple fact that Tony Khan still has the worst case of undiagnosed ADHD imaginable. But no, seriously, think about that for a minute. Think of all the pay-per-views you've seen in your entire lifetime as a wrestling fan. How many pay-per-views have you seen where not a single match on the card was a straight one-on-one match? This has to be a record of some kind. Moreover, it's a clear-cut example of Tony using every desperate ploy imaginable to try and validate most of these people's contracts. And you saw a textbook example of that in the opener. By the way, I want to say this now before I even start delving into the card. This crowd sucked. I don't know if it was the way that they were miking the crowd or if the audio feed was just bad for the majority of this thing, but am I exaggerating, or was the crowd dead for the majority of this pay-per-view? Now, of course, this is where everybody says, well, I went to the building live and, oh, everybody was into the show from top to bottom. I'm sure they were. But from where I was sitting at home watching, there were portions of this pay-per-view where I was not convinced the building was entirely empty. It was beyond ridiculous at points. So, if AEW ever decides that they don't want to run pay-per-views in Las Vegas anymore, more power to them. Because this crowd sucked a cock. Moreover, they were probably just looking at the majority of this card and said, there really ain't a reason to get excited about anything. So in some avenues, I don't blame them. But in kickstarting this fiasco, they went ahead and dived right in with this 21-person battle royal with all the job guys. 21 bodies just cluttering the ring and doing a bunch of shit, as I wrote down. Now, of course, this is how the pay-per-view begins. So nobody gets a ring entrance. There are guys in the ring doing spots. There are guys outside the ring doing spots. Some people are just aimlessly standing around watching the other guys fight. Of course, there are like 8 officials at ringside, and none of them are trying to enforce any kind of rules. Apparently, you're allowed to just decide, I don't feel like getting in the ring right now to wrestle. So I'm just going to hang out on the floor and wait for the ring to clear out a bit. That's what fucking Brian Cage was doing for 50% of the match. Just standing there in the aisleway with his arms crossed, watching these other idiots flip around and do all their choreographed parkour. And again, virtually everybody involved here are just a bunch of indie jagoffs. So nothing anybody does makes a lick of sense in the context of a battle royal. Guys are flipping around and doing aerial stunts, making it very easy for other guys to just shove them off the top turnbuckle or kick them out of the air onto the floor. Hence, they would be eliminated from the match. And meanwhile, saddled in the middle of all this, poor Dustin Rhodes and poor Ricky Starks. The only 2 actual talents in this thing that are worth giving a damn about. Of course, they're just another set of dudes in this thing. Amidst a fucking feud they've been building up on television with Ricky, Jay White, and Juicy Fruit. And instead of, I don't know, maybe being a competent booker for once in his lifetime and just doing a straight match on pay-per-view here with Jay White and Ricky Starks, now he just throws him into the middle of a meaningless battle royal with a bunch of other bodies. Because Tony's a moron and has no idea what the hell he's doing. It was made even better by the fact that, of all people to eliminate Ricky in this match, who should they give that esteemed pleasure to but fucking Big Bill? What a wet fart reaction that got. I mean, I didn't even realize people like Grandpa Keith were in the match until like the final 8 or so guys. Apparently him and Swerve Strickland are still feuding. 5 months past the point of relevancy. You know, to be honest with you though, I'm spending way more time talking about this than I really need to. The main story at the end of this was the company mascot going over. Again. The unhealthy porn obsession continues with Tony Khan's infatuation with this hipster-looking dork. And you know, beyond the fact that every time I see this chump, it just puts me in a foul mood, can we just agree right now, even if for whatever reason you're a fan of this fucking clown, are you at least willing to accept the premise that Tony Khan is no longer pushing this guy on television, but that he is legitimately ramming this motherfucker down our throats? saying, you will like this guy. And not only does it make me resent the douchebag that much more, it makes me resent Tony for actually thinking this is going to get the guy over. Not just with me, but anybody else out there that hasn't already tasted the Orange Cassidy Kool-Aid. Knowing the guy's the shits, knowing he has zero talent, knowing the gimmick has long since overstayed its welcome, he just won't stop with it. And people have brought this up before, but I'll be the first one to vindicate it. You know it doesn't stop here. We are only scratching the surface of how far Tony is willing to go with this idiot. And I'm telling you this now. Mark my words. I'll throw it out in the open right here, right now. The day comes when we see this guy confront MJF on TV and challenge him for the World Championship. That is the day I put my foot down and say, I'm done with this show. I will turn it off and never speak of it again. You think I'm kidding? Try me, Tony. Fucking try me. Because if you're willing to go that far with even teasing the idea that this cretin could conceivably become world champion for any wrestling organization, what's stopping you from just putting the belt on him, period? At that point, you may as well. Going in all in with the guy. So that abomination took up the first 20-ish minutes of the pay-per-view. The incessant ramming continues, and I predict it only gets more insufferable from here. And from there, we go from the outhouse to the other outhouse. On a pay-per-view scheduled with more gimmick matches than a Russo-inspired pay-per-view circa WCW 2000, it is now time for the unsanctioned match between Adam Cole and Chris Jericho. Anything goes, no DQ, no holds barred. Translation, just do every pattern plunder garbage match you've seen since the days of ECW in the 90s. This match. Oh my fucking God, this match. I have seen some negative star matches in my day. I won't be the guy that tells you that I put much stock in Meltzer Magoo's star rating system. Mostly in that I guarantee you he probably gave that horseshit main event another 5-star rating because his boys were a part of it. But if I ever decided that I wanted to adopt a star rating system of any kind, this one would rank in the negatives for sure. It was... Well, let's just go ahead and break down a few things that were wrong with this. Now, of course, the story going in was that everybody was going to be out there running amok and getting involved somehow, which then begs the question, knowing that to be the case, why didn't Tony Khan step in as a promoter and book a stipulation for Cole versus Jericho where everybody was banned from ringside under penalty of fine or suspension if they tried to get involved? Seems like the easiest stipulation in the world to me. But the genius couldn't figure it out. Well, of course, the answer is that's why Sabu was put in charge to be the special guest enforcer, to ensure that nobody got involved during the match. Oh, was he now? Is that why he immediately got into a fight with all of Jericho's job guys from the opening bell and did the standoff with Jericho in the ring, while Cole was just waiting on the floor playing with his dick the entire time? What a great enforcer. Yeah, because I remember when Mike Tyson did the same thing at WrestleMania 14, where he just decided to go into business for himself and start challenging Michaels to a fight 1 minute into the opening bell. Y'all remember when that happened, right? So after JR is practically seething with rage at the commentary booth, saying the quiet part out loud with all these fucking douchebags at ringside having a street fight and distracting from the Cole Jericho stuff, the fact that somebody needs to get rid of all these idiots so they can focus the attention back on what the advertised match was supposed to be in the first fucking place. Well, you'll never guess what happens. They do their predictable Sabu table bump so that people can all ejaculate to the nostalgia of seeing Sabu go through a table and figuring that was the only reason Tony brought him in the first place, so he could do a table spot on pay-per-view. Well, he picked up his paycheck, so guess where Sabu went? Well, he just left. Along with the rest of the Jagoff Society crew. Sabu fought them all to the back, alongside Roddy. That was the last we ever saw of them. They never came back out. For all we know, they hitched a ride in an Uber so they could get dinner and head back to the hotel room to watch the rest of this fucking debacle of a pay-per-view. What a great payout for Sabu, by the way. Glad they bothered. Sorry, I'm laughing because of a comment somebody left on one of my recent shows. Trying to justify the Sabu appearance on Dynamite. Talking about how he was so badass in ECW. Saying he was more hardcore than Mick Foley. I'm like, dude. I mean, it wasn't even worth spending time commenting on. It was just so absurd. But on his best day, Sabu wouldn't lace Foley's boots in the ring. Comparing Sabu to Mick Foley as a worker is like trying to compare fucking Bob Holly to Steve Austin. Ridiculous. But, you know, at the end of the day, I can't blame the kid. This is what the ECW generation did to all the hardcore fans we see watching today. Poison their mind to think that the majority of these crash dummies were ever actual stars. So finally, after everybody powdered and left Jericho and Cole alone to actually have their match, if you can even call it that, now they just went ahead and did a bunch of weapon spots for a while. There was a spot where Cole threw Jericho out to the floor and Jericho immediately went to grab his wrist. It was a horrible landing. Wouldn't be surprised if he sprained or even broke his wrist. I enjoyed the fire extinguisher spot where Jericho made sure to turn his head right toward the hose to make sure he made contact with the powder. That's always good to see. Of course, you had to figure they were eventually going to get Britt involved. Somehow, some way. So here she comes running down the aisleway with a kendo stick. Starts going ham on Jericho in the corner. And I guess Saraya was conveniently on standby to run down approximately 30 seconds later so she could eat a bunch of kendo stick shots as well. Great running, by the way. Just run down to the ring with no weapon in hand while this wild, deranged, crazy woman is whipping a kendo stick around in the air. Yeah, that'll go over splendidly. So, of course, the girls immediately fight off, and we never see them again. Well, actually, we saw Saraya in a pre-tape with Jericho later on, but in terms of seeing them live in the building, that was pretty much it. And while my brain continued to rot into obscurity having to endure this thing, what's supposed to be a blood feud between two guys that can't stand each other, of course, what should the fans begin to cheer but, "We want tables." And of course, the moment Cole gets a chair thrown at his head and he falls through a conveniently placed table on the floor, what should the fans do but cheer? Because they got to see somebody fall through a table. And then there were the chain cuffs. And the only reason I even refer to them as chain cuffs is that, well, point blank, that's exactly what they were. It was a giant long chain with two sets of handcuffs at each opposing end. Now, I will be the first to tell you that I am not an expert in the field of handcuffs. I don't have any sort of secret fetish for chain cuffs. But I am curious. Even if there was such a thing in real life as a giant steel chain with two cuffs wrapped around each end, what would the primary use for it be? Why on earth would you design a set of handcuffs to be placed at the end of a 15-foot chain for any real-world reason? I mean, if you're trying to detain somebody, the idea of using handcuffs is that you place both of their hands behind their back so they have very little to no ability to maneuver their arms, wrists, or hands. In this case, you had Jericho and Cole strapped to one end of the chain by one wrist, which basically turned the match into an impromptu chain match, which then the thought occurred to me, why didn't they just book this to be a chain match then? But again, we're long past the point of trying to make sense of any of this. So eventually, while I continued to try and think of any logical reason for the existence of a 15-foot chain with cuffs attached to the end of them, after Cole hit one of the worst Panama sunrises I've ever seen, both guys are going back and forth with the chain. They're tangled up in this thing to the point where it's actually hindering their ability to move around effectively. Finally, Cole gives Jericho a running knee to the back of the head, and well, rather than going for the cover, he takes about 2 minutes to try and wrap some of the chain around his knees so he can hit Jericho with another running knee. Again, not going for the pin, just kind of stalling and hovering over Jericho's dead body for Christ knows what reason. Sitting there saying to myself, take it home, boys. We're burning daylight here. And with the perfect cap to this abysmal catastrophe, how fitting that when Cole is hammering down on Jericho with elbows and punches, referee Aubrey calls for the bell. And you know what the fans did, people? You guessed it. They booed. I wish I could make that up. But I'm not ribbing. Adam Cole won via ref stoppage. And the fans shat all over it. Probably because they all collectively agreed how rotten this all was by the end of it. So you can't even say they got a satisfying payoff. So yeah, that was one of the worst matches I've ever seen in my life. Everyone involved came out looking worse than they did going in. And now that we know the Sabu cameo was literally just done so we could see him do another botched table spot, like he's done for the majority of his career because the guy's always fucking sucked. Now I know I was vindicated in my opinion that he's just as rotten now as he was back when he was in his prime in the late 90s. So that match can blow me. So at this point, now that the crowd was emotionally drained for having to sit through that calamity, now it's FTR's job to go out there and try and pick the energy back up. And unfortunately, they were kind of in a no-win situation, having to go out there and wrestle Jay Lethal and Jeff Jarrett for the tag titles. And I obviously have to mention the fact that Mark Briscoe was the special guest referee for this match because, well, clearly that's the best thing Tony could come up with for Mark to get booked on a pay-per-view. Not have him actually wrestle a match, but having him officiate a match with two other teams. Well, I guess I should try to count the positives while I can. Up to this point in the show, this was the first match on the card that resembled any kind of pro wrestling match of any kind. Took us until fucking match 3 to get there. what with the two garbage matches that preceded it. And albeit the story's been mostly lousy with how they've gone about building this up on television, by the end of this thing, I really couldn't figure out how I felt about it. I was conflicted. They definitely tried a lot of stuff here. I don't want to give FTR a hard time because, again, they were working hard. They were attempting to bring some form of pro wrestling to this Outlaw card. They did one of those classic stereo spots with Jarrett and Lethal where they gave them atomic drops so they would collide heads with each other. And then when Jarrett and Lethal went to flip Dax and Cash overhead so they could both sweep out the knees, poor Dax landed and fell right on his ass. And the people all just kind of sighed and went, ugh. Well, that clearly didn't work. Now, of course, when you're in FTR's shoes and you're signed to a company where you only get to wrestle on TV 3 times out of the fucking year, it's kind of easy to get rusty in the ring when you don't get enough repetitions. Early on, I'd say it took them a while to find their footing with everything. They were trying to keep things very basic at first, with FTR getting cut off and cheap shotted behind Mark's back. But the fans weren't really into it like they should have been. Wasn't really generating any kind of heat reaction from the crowd. A lot of them were just sitting on their hands waiting for things to escalate. But again, I already talked about how the crowd sucked for the majority of the show anyway. I will say, once Dax got the hot tag and started firing a comeback on the heels, the energy definitely picked up. I mean, you could tell people were starting to come alive a little bit because they knew the intensity level was about to kick up. And when FTR did their Doomsday Powerbomb clothesline and Mark goes to count the 3, but Sanjay yanks Cash out of the ring, that's when I would say things turned around a little bit in the match. Because the people always pop for the ejection spot. Not that it served a purpose at the end of the day, because all the chaos that followed kind of prevented the ejection spot from meaning anything. They definitely jumped the gun on the guitar shot spot. Right as Mark and Dax are turning their attention to Sanjay and Bootleg Khali, you could see Dax turn over his shoulder too early with Mark, and then it was obvious that Jarrett wasn't in position with the guitar, so they had to turn around and look at the heels on the ramp again. It was a little awkward. And then, of course, they turn around again, and Mark eats the guitar shot. Easily the spot of the night. When Karen and Jarrett hit Aubrey with the guitar and laid her out dead, I fucking lost it. The comical visual of Aubrey taking a gimmick guitar shot and falling over like someone shot her in the head with a gun, I don't think that bump will ever leave my memory. It was cartoonishly bad. I also enjoyed the spot where Lethal parted the Red Seas and shoved Dax and Cash to the side so he could spring off the ropes and hit them with the lethal injection. That was one of those spots where I saw it and I was like, come on. What the fuck was that? Phony. Absurd. But I'll say this. Despite a lot of the overbooked wackiness at the end there, when Jeff got the 2 count off the belt shot to FTR, and he tried to slap Mark in the corner but ate one back as a result, and FTR immediately hit the big rig on Jeff and pinned him, that was a good finish. The people obviously popped when FTR and Mark embraced at the end there. Probably as a sigh of relief. Like, thank God they didn't swerve anybody here. This went through a roller coaster ride of ups and downs. Waves of good and bad strewn throughout. It took a while to get going, but by the end, I didn't hate it. Up to this point, it was easily the best match on the show by default. When I look back at the show as a whole, it was arguably the best match on the show, period. Which I know isn't saying a whole lot. It still kind of leaves FTR in the dark with any probable title challengers. I mean, based on the angle they shot moments after this with Ricky Starks in the back, kind of looks like they might be setting up some kind of 6-man tag in the future with Jay White, Juicy Fruit, and some other name to be announced. Because, of course, they can never keep things simple with their matches in AEW. Nothing can ever be a one-on-one match. Always has to be some multi-person deal. But I don't know. We'll see. So up next, after we saw Chris Jericho and Saraya flip their lid in the back, challenging Adam Cole and Britt Baker to a mixed tag on Dynamite. Also, after me losing my shit and laughing at Jericho throwing yet another fireball in a random geek's face, that is when we finally get to the ladder match with Christian Cage and Wardlow for the TNT title. And for the record, the angle with Jericho lighting the fireball in the guy's face was only funny because of JR's gives no fucks reaction. He can't be serious. No, he must be serious. God, is that guy tapped out. It's beyond hysterical. So anyway, this match. Obviously a gimmick match that plays to the strengths of both talents involved, factoring in all of Christian's injuries he sustained in the last year alone. Also factoring in that Wardlow looked like a bull in a china shop the last time AEW shot an angle with him in ladders on TV. Keeping in mind that at this point in the show, here at Gimmicks R Us, the pay-per-view, we've already seen a 21-person battle royal in the opener, followed by an unsanctioned anything-goes garbage street fight, followed by a regularly sanctioned tag match with all kinds of outside interference and run-in angles galore. Now we dive right back into the plunder material, with this alleged ladder match now becoming a glorified TLC match. Which I should have seen coming the moment they fucking announced this thing as a ladder match. Should have known they were going to break out the tables. Maybe I was just giving Christian too much credit, thinking he was going to try and idiot-proof this thing as much as possible. And while the questions continue to arise, what prompted this to be a ladder match aside from the angle they shot on TV one time where Christian hit Wardlow with a fucking ladder? Well, I don't think there ever really was a reason. Tony just decided, we need to have a ladder match on the card. So here you go. And again, it's a ladder match. So what can you really say about it aside from they did a bunch of ladder spots, some of which looked more precarious than others. But at the end of the day, I mean, all the spots with ladders are designed to basically get oh shit pops from everybody. Because this is the world we live in now with wrestling. Everything's a game of can you top this? With the risky stuff people are willing to try. Whether or not they should in the first place, that's an entirely different conversation. But nothing about it comes off like a professional wrestling contest where two guys are fighting to see who the better man is. And of course, while they're doing dangerous ladder stunts and needlessly putting their bodies in jeopardy, doing all this stupid outlaw shit for no reason, I'm just wincing the entire time and waiting for somebody to blow out an ACL or just outright die. Somehow neither guy perished by the end of this thing. Although I'm not entirely convinced that Wardlow didn't do some severe bodily damage with the way he was limping and bumbling around. The spot where he tried to spring onto the ladder and the whole thing basically just caved in from under itself. God, that looked horrible. You know, Wardlow coming right down and landing on the ladder and banging up his knee. That probably sucked. And of course, moments later, when the fucking ref comes in to try and hold the ladder down so he can climb it, Wardlow flips his lid on him and just throws the ladder aside so he can grab another one. I'm like, somebody finally figured it out. Jesus H. Christ. The fact that you can just grab another ladder. Who'd have thunk it? It's not like they're all just spammed around ringside anyway. Unlike the Shawn Razor ladder match where he only had one ladder accessible the entire time. Somebody put two and two together. But I'll just go ahead and skip to the end here because I really didn't have anything remotely constructive to say about the majority of the match. Wardlow did a diving senton onto the dinosaur through the tables. Because, of course, had to create a highlight reel moment. They also probably created several broken discs in Wardlow's back, considering how hard his spine hit the ground. Somewhere at the end here, Arn Anderson came out, and I'll be honest with you, I have no idea what the fuck this is supposed to be, but were we led to believe that he bit off Luchasaurus' thumb? Or that he took off a good chunk of the skin? I mean, obviously he had a gimmick in his mouth. God, his cheeks were puffier than a kid with gauze in his mouth after having his wisdom teeth removed. But what the hell was the point of it? It didn't even get a reaction from the fans. Most people were just looking around like, what the fuck was he doing? So finally, Wardlow climbed the ladder and won. Kind of anticlimactic. This was a total waste of a Christian match, in my book. Wardlow didn't come out any better for having been a part of it. And all it did was needlessly bang up both guys' bodies after the fact. And for what? What purpose did it serve to make this a ladder match? How is this a proper teaching lesson for Wardlow? A guy that really needs to learn how to put together and structure matches if he wants to get better. He had Christian as a dance partner here. All they had to do was simplify everything so Christian could slow Wardlow down and teach him how to properly lay out a big man, little man match. Could have done that. Probably would have been more effective at the end of the day. But again, they had to get too cute with the gimmicks. And this was the end result. A match that did nothing for Wardlow and just beat up both guys' bodies unnecessarily. I don't know what more you want me to say about it. Are you all going to remember this match a year from now? I sure as hell won't. So after having sat through the abomination that was most of the pay-per-view up to this point, I had to leave the room and go stick my head in the freezer. So, I am not kidding when I say I took a very substantial hiatus from this fucking fiasco for a while. I don't know how long I was out of the room, but it was at least a good half hour before I came back in and started paying attention to anything that was going on again. There was a Tony Storm, Jamie Hayter title match that I skipped out on entirely. No idea what happened there. I mean, I was gone for the entire length of that match. There was another Haunted House of Horrors match with Malachi's Land of Misfit Toys and the Acclaimed. Didn't think there would ever be a period where I would actively be boycotting an Acclaimed match, but AEW somehow managed to make that happen. But I was at least hovering around the room while that was going on. Nothing I saw looked visually appealing, so I just kept making passing glances at the TV monitor until that was all wrapped up. There was also a Jade Cargill TBS title match with Taya Valkyrie that I made passing glances at occasionally. And I was about to walk out of the room after Jade beat her, but then I heard Mark Sterling get on the microphone and start doing a promo about how Jade has run through all the competition in AEW, and there's nobody left on the roster to beat. Now, naturally, at that point, you kind of figured somebody was going to come out, so I was glued to the TV monitor momentarily, and who should wind up making her return but Chris Statlander. And I've heard Statlander's name get thrown out there as one of the possible options to be the one to end Jade's undefeated streak. I just didn't realize they were going to jump on it here. I mean, I guess with Jade being 60-0 by the end of this thing, Tony decided, well, I guess we can cut the cord now and just be done with it. Nice round number to go out on, I guess. Because Lord knows his undefeated streak has long since overstayed its welcome. So sure enough, Chris comes out there and has an impromptu title match with Jade. They ring the bell. Goes about a minute. And when Jade goes for her chicken wing finish, Statlander fights out of it and picks up Jade to hit her with that cradle tombstone thingamabob. And she pins her. And it got a nuclear babyface pop from the crowd. From the moment Statlander made a return here, she was instantly over with the fans. And when she got that pin over Jade, everyone shat themselves. And it was a cool moment. I'll give them that. For all the effort they put into that undefeated streak that went nowhere, it was going to have to be a satisfying payoff by the time they ended it. And this was probably about as good as you can get. And I'm happy for Statlander. She's been plagued by a lot of injuries in this company, and it's held her back from being able to make any kind of substantial progress as an on-screen talent. A lot of the stuff with her has been start and stop in the booking department because right when it looked like they were starting to get off the ground with her, they had to pull the plug and change direction because she would end up being out with another injury. So, we'll see what they do with her as the TBS champion. She's made a lot of improvement in the last few years. Now I think it's just a matter of trying to find her some quality opponents to work with. The problem with AEW is that that's pretty few and far between with the talent pool they have in the girls division. But all in all, that was about a half hour of the show that I skipped out on. And I'm not really losing sleep over it, if I'm being honest. After the drizzling shits I was served for the first couple hours of this thing, I needed the break. Elsewise, I don't think I would have made it through the rest of the show. So, well, at that point, they made a decision. They had 2 matches left. Had to figure one of these was going to have to semi-main the pay-per-view. And we can argue whether or not it was the right call. Do you headline it with the 4 Pillars AEW World Title match that really hasn't had any steam since the moment they started building it up? Or do you headline it with the Anarchy in the Arena clusterfuck? Well, they chose to semi-main their world champion. And while under normal circumstances, I would probably be miffed about that decision, not putting their world champion on last, especially when MJF is the only redeeming quality about this fucking abomination of a company more often than not. Well, these aren't normal circumstances we're living in. Because again, this 4 Pillars program never really had much of a main event feel from the moment they announced it. So quite frankly, I was fine with the decision. Either way, looking back, it never really mattered what they had go on last with this pay-per-view. For me, it was the last match I started watching from start to finish without taking multiple breaks. I'll talk about that Anarchy match and how I went about attempting to watch any of that without having to break out the barf bag. It occurred to me as MJF was making his entrance here, I never really pay all that close attention to the guys' nameplates that show up on the graphics for the ring entrances. But this one stuck out to me because it's so ridiculous. MJF's 2023 win-loss record. Are you ready for this? Brace yourselves. 2-0. Wow. I understand that Max's gimmick is that he rarely wrestles, but Jesus H. Christ. How pathetic is that? The idea that 6 months into the year and your world champion has had a sum total of 2 wrestling matches. Not 22. Not even 12. But 2. God, I feel like Charlie from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory right now. And looking back at it now, I just realized it. That doesn't even sound right to me. If you calculate the pay-per-view matches, off the top of my head, I know Max has wrestled Ricky Starks and Bryan Danielson this year. So there's your 2 matches right there. But what about that tag match he worked on TV with the Pillars a few weeks ago? Is that one just stricken from the record book because it was a tag match and MJF isn't part of a regular tag team. I don't know. The whole thing doesn't make any sense. Which kind of summed up the majority of everything about this match. And it's the evident dilemma you run into with multi-man matches where it winds up just turning into an array of non-stop video game moves the whole time. It's impossible to really sell any kind of story in the match because everybody's always trying to get their shit in. And to be fair, they tried some things here to keep it mildly interesting, but by and large, it just didn't work for me. The stuff with the intros took a while to get through. I'm not particularly a fan of the whole WWE presentation with giving everybody the flashy ring intros all the time, trying to dress everything up. It comes off too sports entertaining for me. Like, Darby got the video package, Sammy and Ty Mello came out with the cue cards and announced they were having a baby. And that was cool. Got a nice reaction from everybody. But it's just, I don't know. And of course, MJF got the grand dramatic devil entrance. It's one of those things where I can appreciate the effort, but if it's something that I would commonly see on a WWE pay-per-view, I don't really like seeing it done here, especially on a lower budget level. And again, as far as the match goes, like I said, they tried some stuff. The whole spot at the beginning with everybody ganging up and targeting MJF and beating the shit out of him, that made sense in the context of the story. Although it did basically pinpoint the main issue with the multi-person match to begin with, that it was basically 3 babyfaces and 1 heel, making it kind of difficult to draw any sympathy on the good guys because they had the numbers advantage. Of course, it winds up breaking down into a sea of dives and flips. That was kind of an ongoing theme throughout the whole match. There was a sequence where everybody hit their mentor's finish on each other, which was kind of clever. Jungle Boy did the kill switch, Darby did the Scorpion Deathlock, and MJF did the Crossroads. Still hilarious to me how they're outright name-dropping Cody in AEW like he's not currently one of the biggest stars in the opposition right now. Never going to get over that. The deal where MJF grabbed the microphone and started cutting the promo on Sammy, telling him to lay down and take the fall because he needs the money for his newborn. That was actually kind of funny. Just the whole delivery of it, telling Sammy that being a father is a big responsibility and he can help him out. And of course, MJF lulls MJF in by saying he'll do it, but then he immediately cradles him for a near fall. Again, decently clever idea. Probably Max's idea because he's the only one of these numbnuts with a shred of intelligence and isn't just about doing a bunch of flips and dives for no reason. Again, some spots worked better than others. The whole sequence where all 4 guys were just laying on the mat, holding each other in fake submission holds. Some people probably thought that was clever. Whatever. I thought it was fucking dumb. Especially when they all just decided to randomly break the holds like a minute later for seemingly no reason. As was the stupidity of the spot later on where all 4 guys are exchanging fake blows, and there were instances where guys were literally just standing there waiting for somebody to hit them. Like fucking Darby gets an elbow to the jaw, and then he literally has to stagger and stand there for another 45 seconds and wait for Sammy and Jungle Boy to do their staggering spots. I'm like, why the fuck are MJF and Darby just standing there watching Jungle Boy and Sammy hit each other? Aside from the fact that they had an idea for a stupid spot and were basically just seeing the dry run of it in real time. I'm not kidding. It looked like something the boys would be going over in a dark arena before the fans were in the building. Saying, all right, this is how the spot's going to go. Make sure everybody's in the right place. And everybody's just standing around waiting for their cue. Looked absurd. And you know what? I'll say it. As big a fan I am as the guy, or as big a fan of the guy as I am, shame on MJF for allowing himself to be a part of it. I'd have put my foot down and said, this shit looks visually retarded. If y'all want to do hokey choreography that exposes the business, be my guest, but I'm not taking part in it because it looks stupid. So I'm actually kind of surprised MJF was willing to take part in that. But really, it's how the majority of the spots came off here. It literally looked like a bunch of green guys going over a bunch of arranged, pre-planned choreography. And this is the exact reason why I thought it was a bad idea for MJF to be a part of this thing in the first place. Because all it did was drag him down as a result. It's like them booking a four-way with The Rock defending the WWF title against... Oh, I don't fucking know. Name anybody from the Attitude Era. Val Venus, Crash Holly, and D'Lo Brown. And like, I'm not even trying to demean those three talents, but in this particular instance, it's a top guy surrounded by a bunch of middle card guys. That's what this match came off like on paper. MJF is the clear-cut star. Everybody else, mid-card talent getting shoehorned into a main event spot. Again, all because Tony had an idea. He had to do the Four Pillars match. Not because it made any rational booking sense to do so, but because he wanted to do it. And he was never going to steer away from it. He was never going to call an audible. This match was going to happen whether or not we wanted it to. So in the end, guys are going back and forth with near falls, and while they're trading falls, I'm peripherally watching the guys wait for their cue to run in to break things up, because those are the kinds of things my hindbrain is telling me to pay attention to anymore in these kinds of matches, just because I see it so often. It kind of distracts me. And, well, here's what they came up with for a finish. Jungle Boy gets hit with a GTH, so he's down selling. Sammy ends up getting shoved off the top turnbuckle out to the floor, so he crashes and burns. Darby attempts to go up for a coffin drop, but MJF sneaks in and methodically places the world title on top of Jungle Boy's chest, so when Darby comes down, he lands neck first on it. And, of course, Jungle Boy takes the brunt of the impact as well. So from that point, MJF sneaks in, and he pins Darby with a headlock takeover. Because he's a douche. Solid enough finish. And again, while I hated the whole concept of this match before they ever announced it, in execution, I had my faults with it. It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. MJF was the obvious highlight. Everybody else was kind of the supporting character. For what they had to work with going in, I didn't hate it. The obvious pre-planned spots are always going to bug me because they always look so artificially contrived, and I just can't steer myself away from unseeing a lot of that. But in hoping that this whole Four Pillars experiment is over with, maybe they go their separate ways after the fact and move on from it. So, at the end of the day, it was a satisfying finished result. Let us just hope they move on from this and program MJF into something we all want to see. And of course, we come to the main event debacle, which is about as unsatisfying a payoff as one could possibly imagine. Unless for whatever reason you're into the stuff the Elite does. In that case, you're probably going to have a ball watching this thing go down. It's anarchy in the arena, a match concept that I believe was designed to replace football fuckery during the whole scamdemic era. Now it's just taking that idea and putting it in the confines of an arena where, again, pretty much everybody can do whatever the fuck they want. When they did this match last year, I don't think I even bothered watching the majority of it because all I did was get nauseous from all the constant camera cuts. And while the rapid-fire camera cuts did a number on me here, by this point in the show, I was so numb to the stupidity, really didn't even bother me. And for those keeping score at home, it's the BCC versus the Elite. In addition to my sanity being eradicated the longer the match went, the band playing Wild Thing for nearly half the fucking match. God, that was the icing on the cake. And like, you know, the one thing you hear me always say about train wreck pandemonium matches or angles in wrestling, period, because of the fact that there's so much shit going on, it's impossible to keep track of anything that's happening. I always say, where do I even start? And when it comes to a match like this, I'm not even exaggerating. I don't even know how I'm supposed to go about reviewing it. What do you say about it? How do you even begin to contemplate this match? There's 57 different angles happening at a given time. At the points the camera's filming one group of guys doing shit, something's happening off camera somewhere else. The announcers are telling us about shit that's happening at the polar opposite end of the arena, and of course we don't see it happen in real time. Sometimes we get a replay, sometimes we don't. So we just hear things happening, and we're just supposed to presume that guys are tumbling down staircases or whatever. At one point during the brawling, Excalibur just calmly and passingly mentions that Mox is bleeding. And of course, the hilarious thing is that it's so not out of the ordinary to see Mox gig himself, you don't even think twice about it. You're like, oh, Mox is bleeding, huh? Yeah. And the sky is blue and water is wet. What else is new with that fucking moron? And I probably got about 5 or so minutes into this thing before I left the room to go do something. Obviously, I kept it on in the background while I heard people shouting and loud thuds and crashes were happening. I saw the deal where Paige took off the eye patch to reveal that his eye was perfectly fine. I presume that was supposed to get some kind of reaction from the fans. It didn't. We had the Beta Bucks super kicking the band, because they probably thought that was a cute idea. There was some spot where Mox and Omega were fighting by the barbed wire poker chip. Because, of course, the fucker was going to be wrapped in barbed wire. I mean, did you really think it wasn't? I saw the multiple split screens where Claudio was fighting with one of the Bucks in the back. At one point, they found themselves in the back of a pickup truck. And, of course, the moment Claudio pile drives him and decides to walk away, my first thought was, you fucking idiot. Could have pinned him. Right there. Could have ended this fiasco right now, but no, he just walked away. Just left. Like a dolt. At one point, they were doing spots with a leaf blower. Because obviously that's a piece of furniture that you would naturally find hanging out underneath a wrestling ring. Yeah, you never know when you're going to need to break out the leaf blower at an indoor arena. Somewhere during this, Matty Buck ended up running back down with an obviously loaded boot, so he could super kick Mox in the face and create some kind of exploding effect. Whatever it was, I have no idea what the fuck the point of it was or why they thought it would be a good idea. But that would also imply that the Bucks were really known for ever coming up with good ideas. And, well, I left the room again after the exploding boot of doom spot. That's where I went into the kitchen and pulled out the butcher's knife and contemplated whether or not I should just end it right then and there. Came back in the room just in time to see Matty Buck get dropped feet first onto exposed thumbtacks. And that's when I said, all right, I think I'm about ready to get to the finish of this thing, because this is already generating enough heat with me to never want to bother watching another AEW show for as long as I live. And finally, we get to the finishing sequence. Predictably, because everybody and their mother was calling this from the moment they even inserted the guy into the equation. While the fight's going on, Some masked dude in a black jumpsuit hits the ring and lays out one of the elite guys. I think it was Omega. And of course, the fans immediately scream, "It's Takeshita!" As if it took more than 3 seconds to figure that one out. So, of course, he removes the face guard, and lo and behold, it's Takeshita. Standing there looking bummy and generic. And that's when I think Yuta hits Omega with the screwdriver and then pinned him with a flash roll-up. Yeah. After all the chaotic shit that happened in this match, of course the finish was going to be a flash pin. Woo! Yeah. And that, my friends, is only scratching the surface of this abomination. If I really wanted to go into further detail about this thing and lower your IQ level some more, I could. But that would probably be giving this thing more attention than it's warranted. It was everything I knew it would be. It's certainly everything wrong with modern professional wrestling. All wrapped up under one giant bow. And when it comes to the elite stuff in AEW, I'll just repeat what I've been saying for the last year and a half. If for whatever reason you're part of that cult fan base that actually enjoys this stuff and thinks it's good, I'm happy for you, man. More power to you. Let your freak flag fly. But I, for one, don't think this is good wrestling. I can't even really call it wrestling because it's not. It exploits the business and makes it look phony and fake. Makes me embarrassed to even call myself a wrestling fan when I see shit like this happen. And while some people might be tolerant or okay with it, I'm not one of those people. And this right here, watching this whole debacle go down, it's the perfect model for why I'm just counting down the days until this AEW Collision show happens. Because all it does is bring me one step closer to never having to watch another one of these fucking elite garbage matches ever again. And if that's the case, then June 17th can't come soon enough. This is the exact kind of thing you can expect with more unfiltered elite and BCC calling the shots on the Dynamite shows. Giving these guys free rein to just come up with their own ideas and let them run roughshod over the entire program. When you leave the ball in Omega and the Bucks and Moxley's court, just expect more stuff like this. Because that's all you can expect. This is their definition of what wrestling is supposed to be. This backyard outlaw trampoline mud show shit. Because that's what it is. It's shit. 30 minutes of this steaming hot garbage. That's how long they devoted to this as their pay-per-view main event. Unbelievable. I'm not kidding, man. If this wasn't the single worst, this was easily, without a doubt, among the top 10 worst pay-per-views I've seen out of any wrestling company in my entire life. I remember TNA having some real clunkers that I paid for back in the late 2000s, early 2010s. This might have been worse than the majority of those. What was that pay-per-view that had that Jenna Sharmell match years ago that blew up the internet as being one of the worst matches in the history of the sport? This show had like 3 of those matches in one night. I'm not one to exaggerate either when I say something is the worst match or the worst pay-per-view or the worst whatever I've seen in my life. Certainly in the modern era, in the last 4 or 5 years, this Double or Nothing pay-per-view easily ranks among the worst I've ever seen. Horrible show. Awful. There were so few redeeming qualities about this thing. It's almost impossible not to rank this among some of the worst attempts at running pay-per-views in the last decade. And it's not leaving me hopeful for the future of Dynamite. Last year around this point is when I started to see a massive dip in the quality of the show. The Forbidden Door disaster, all the injuries that circulated, MJF and Punk being off the show for the majority of the summer, Tony Khan's worst booking instincts coming to a head, shows making no sense from week to week. And we're knee-deep into all that again, man. I hate to say we're starting to venture back into that same territory, but judging the fallout from this show, it's not leaving me all that optimistic. This pay-per-view did no favors in shifting my opinion. I think we're going to be in for a world of hurting this summer. And it could be even worse than last year. But that's why I'm just, again, counting down the days until June 17th. My God. But this is what people wanted. This is the post-Punk era of AEW. This is what the people have been clamoring for, right? I'll bet. I'll bet. So that was an interesting weekend. That ran the whole gamut. It really did. I don't really even know how to conclude everything at the end of the day. Moreover, this show. I'll say this, man. The stark contrast between WWE and AEW right now, it's never been more apparent. You know, I talk about with WWE how things are usually boring. The TV shows just really don't light my world on fire, but the one thing I constantly say about WWE, regardless of how good or bad the TV shows are, or even the pay-per-views, rarely do I ever get the sense that they're trying to insult my intelligence. AEW, I feel like they go out of their way at times to really put that to the forefront. And this pay-per-view is a clear-cut example of that, man. This is just... Not only is it Tony Khan letting the Elite run the show again, but it's all of his worst booking instincts coming to fruition. And again, like I talked about with the Orange Cassidy thing, it's him telling me that this is the future direction of the company and that whether or not I want to like it, I'm going to have to put up with it. And you know what I say to that? I say, fuck you, Tony. No. I won't accept that. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to see how that Saturday show unfolds. I'm going to see what happens when you let guys like CM Punk man the fort. And we'll see who puts on the better TV show. Because right now, the cult fan base that's currently watching the Wednesday night shows, that's your audience, Tony. We're long past the point of trying to reach new eyeballs. With the product you've been putting on the TV shows lately, the only people that would actually be stupid enough to put themselves through that are the cult fan base. And I guess people like me that like to torture myself endlessly. But, yeah. I just don't even know what to say at this point. So why don't we go ahead and just wrap everything up, because I know this show's going to take me a long time to edit anyway, so while I have the day off, I might as well just devote the rest of the day to it. So you'll see this one go up later on Monday afternoon, maybe even evening. And by all means, if you have anything to chime in with that pay-per-view, let me know. Let me know the world of wonders that I was missing out on that show. Because clearly I'm missing the mark on something. I just don't see the greatness that was that Double or Nothing pay-per-view. And all those 5-star matches that we saw. Yeah. Well, we'll be back on the Friday show. And until then, take care all. Peace out.